Thank you everyone for joining us from wherever you are. I see already we have viewers from around the world. I see London, Israel, New York, North Carolina, Virginia. A fantastic mix. Thank you for joining us for this special panel discussion on Seders in the time of coronavirus. To briefly introduce our panelists, we have Liza Schoenfein, food journalist and host of the podcast and blog Life, Death, and Dinner. Say hello, Liza.
Hi, everybody.
Next, we have Jane Eisner, Director of Academic Affairs for the Columbia School of Journalism and former Editor-in-Chief of The Forward. Hello, Jane.
Hello.
And finally, joining us all the way from Israel, Adeena Sussman, author of Sababa, Fresh Sunny Flavors from My Israeli Kitchen. Hello.
Hello.
Yay. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Everyone just froze. Oh, there you are. Hi. I would like to just say that I've worked with both of you. Just tell people I was food editor of The Forward when Jane was editor-in-chief of The Forward. We worked together for a number of really great years. And Adeena wrote for us at The Forward, wrote about food, and has also written for me probably for over 10 years at other places. And so we've all known each other for a long time, and I've actually had the pleasure of having dinner at with both of you, eating both of your cooking. You're both wonderful cooks, and
as are you.
And so, thank you. And I think we've even had some holidays together, or certainly I've had Shabbat at Jane's house. And Jane, are you there? Because I just lost your picture.
I am. I just lost your picture too, but I am here.
Okay. There you are.
There we go.
All right.
Great.
So I thought that I would like to ask you guys, and I think we should all talk about how we are having to adapt this year. That's really what this is about. How we're adapting our Seders. I think each of us does a very different Seder from each other. And because I think it's very different in Israel than it is at Jane's house, where you keep a kosher kitchen. And I'm a Reform Jew, so I have a kind of a shorter Seder, and it's different from, I think, both of yours. So I wanted to ask you, and I'll start with Jane. So you have hosted your own Seder, both Seders. You told me for 15 years you've been cooking and preparing and hosting. And so this is obviously a very, very different Passover for you. Can you tell us about that, and about sort of what are the most significant issues that you are facing when thinking about this holiday, and how you're adapting? I'll start with how you're adapting.
Yeah, I think it's been 15 or 20 years that we've hosted both of our Seders, first in a large dining room outside of Philadelphia, and now in a much smaller apartment in New York City. Passover has always been my favorite holiday. When our daughters were younger, because they went to day school, they were very well versed in the Seders. So it was something that they participated in from the beginning. I'd always make sure to invite their friends and friends' families. We've had total strangers at our Seders as well. 1 year in Philadelphia, we were very friendly with the consul, the Israeli consul, and his family, and they used to come to our second Seder, having done the first Seder in the consul. 1 year they had a new security guard, and he didn't have a place to go, and so into my house walks Vladimir, who shook my hand nicely and shook my husband's hand so firmly that my husband thought it was going to be crushed. And I said, we had the safest Seder on the main line of Philadelphia that year. So we have lots of wonderful memories. I'm a good cook, but not a great cook, not like you and Adeena. So for me, it's not so much about the food as about the learning and the conversation, the songs, the debates. We spend a lot of time thinking about who will be at the table and what they can contribute. We give prompts to people in advance. To me, it's not just about inviting people to your table and asking them to bring a bottle of wine. It's also what of themselves can they share? Because we can all share. We don't have to be learned. The issues and the core discussions at Seder are open to everyone. We've had lots of non-Jews at our Seder who contribute just as much as the rabbis do. And that's what I've always loved about it. And I have to admit, I'm mourning somewhat right now. I have a feeling, a little bit of grief and loss at not being able to do that this year, and trying to focus very hard on how to get to the essence of the Seder in a way that we can do it virtually.
Yeah. Have you invited people to a virtual Seder, or do you know how many people approximately are going to be at your virtual Seder?
Well, we're doing 2 virtual Seders by Zoom. I invited everyone who was initially coming, and then a bunch of other people as well. It is true that you can have the more the merrier. It's not like I'm going to run out of brisket. And we are trying to figure out how to do this. We are starting to work on creating a Seder online that we would then, I hope, share with our guests, and also think about ways of really incorporating this monumental change that we are all experiencing into our Seder and into our discussion.
Okay, and Adeena, what about you? Hi.
Usually, and for the last 5 years or so, we've celebrated with a big raucous Seder in Jerusalem with my husband's family. His sister travels from the States, and my husband's 2 nieces and their husbands live in Israel, as do my husband's grown children, and we have a big family celebration. And I grew up having Seders of 25, 2 Seders of 25 each at my home in Palo Alto. And I see that my dad just signed on from Palo Alto, so hi, Dad. And this year, we are having a Seder for 2 in Tel Aviv, my husband and myself. I have to say, I have never cooked Seder as a professional cook. I've always been with family. And as the less kosher member of my family, I have typically sometimes cooked a few dishes with my sister or with my sister-in-law and her family. And this is the first time I'm going to be making a Seder on my own. And the irony of it is that it's for 2.
What are you making?
It happens to be my husband's 60th birthday on April 8th, Erev Pesach. And one of the things that I've been thinking about this year is just trying to disabuse myself of the idea that we need to cook the traditional dishes of Seder in order to have this Seder be meaningful. The whole world is going through a paradigm shift right now, and we are too. And what I want to do is make my husband happy because it's his birthday and he wants meatloaf. So I'm going to be making him meatloaf for Seder.
Wow,
in addition to my mother's
meatloaf.
overnight chickens and a lot of other traditional things, but I'm going to be incorporating a new tradition involving his birthday. And I do think that this year, you know, as Jane was saying, that the significance of so many of the symbols, the messages of Passover are just so much more resonant than ever with, you know, not to mention the concept of plagues, but also thinking about freedom, you know, throughout history and throughout Seder history, we have called attention to different issues of freedom, whether it was Soviet Jewry or feminism or LGBTQ communities. And this year, I think we're really thinking about what freedom means to each of us. A, because some of us, like me, are restricted from going within 100 yards of my home, but also that, you know, our health is a form of freedom. Our life is a form of freedom. Health care is a form of freedom. And all of these things have just even more resonance and significance than ever. And I think even the most unintrospective person cannot avoid how significant the Passover story is and how resonant it is this year, like above all others.
That is so true. That's a really fantastic way of looking at it.
Yeah, I've been thinking, you know, what does it mean to celebrate freedom when you're in confinement? You know, what does it mean to celebrate family when you can't touch them? I mean, I'm going to be with my husband, and my children and son-in-law and grandchildren are all going to be in other places, as well as friends who have become like family, especially on this holiday. And I think it really causes us to think about that. What does it mean to suddenly have much less? You know, we are not in the city. We have a home upstate, and it's in a very rural area, and it's much safer for my husband and I, we're over 60, to be here, as well as the fact that one of my daughters is a healthcare worker, and she's going to be staying in our New York City apartment because she can't really be with anyone else and working in a hospital. And I don't have all the things that I usually use for Seder here. I have virtually none of them. I inherited this amazing, beautiful, simple set of silver that we have used every year as our meat silverware for Seder. And it's locked in a cabinet in Manhattan. And there it will be for another year. And so I have to think about what does it mean to strip Seder down to its essence and find meaning in that.
You told me a wonderful story, Jane, about spending a Passover in the early 1980s in the USSR, and that you had some concerns before you went. And can you just tell us about that?
Because yes, thank you. So in April of 1982, my husband and I had been very involved in the Soviet Jewry movement, and we decided that we wanted to take a trip ourselves to the Soviet Union. We went to Moscow and Kyiv. We were educated and schooled and trained by Soviet Jewry activists back in Philadelphia. And it turns out that really the best time for the both of us work-wise was to go during Passover. So we had Seder with our families, but we didn't know what to do. Like, how are we going to observe Passover in Moscow?
Over the following days.
Yes, and so we talked to a rabbi about it, and he said, look, you are doing a great mitzvah, and that is going to be enough, and it's really important what you are doing. This was at the height of the Cold War, or one might say the nadir of the Cold War, when relations between the Soviet Union and the United States were at their very low. And it was really important for us to visit people. And so we did go and did our best. And that experience also really influenced me. It was frankly the reason I decided afterwards to keep kosher, because I did not grow up keeping kosher. And I had been thinking about it very strongly. Anyhow, we was starting to think about having a family. But I'll never forget being there and being in Kiev. And there's a refugees named Lev Blitzstein, big bear of a man. And we were in his home one night visiting, and he had just come home from work, and he had forgotten to bring his food with him, and he wouldn't eat non-kosher food. And he hadn't eaten all day. And I thought, oh my goodness. I mean, I can get kosher food anywhere where I lived. What do I take for granted? And how can I stay connected to him and so many other Jews, past and present, but through these rituals. So it was a really defining experience for us in so many ways, but it especially resonates during Passover.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things you were worried about was that you weren't going to be able to avoid leavened bread. And when the rabbi said to you, but you're doing a mitzvah, basically he was saying you'll eat what you have to eat. That doesn't matter as much as what you're doing. Is that right? As the good,
yes,
that doesn't matter in the face of the good you're doing.
Yes, he did. And, I think that there's undoubtedly going to be rabbinic dispute about that. I mean, there's rabbinic dispute about everything. But to me, it sort of pointed to the essential humanity in Judaism and our need to care for one another. And in my view, anyhow, or the way I think about being a Jew, is that you do have to prioritize certain things, and some things are more important than others. And you're seeing that now throughout the world. How many even Orthodox rabbis are saying it's okay to Zoom for a Seder. The Sephardic chief rabbi in Israel said that. And, everyone's going to follow their heart or their rabbinic teachings, and that's fine. I'm not saying what people should or should not do, but there's a great deal of latitude and inventiveness in our culture. That's what's helped it survive. And I think we're seeing that today.
So what are some of the ways that you guys are planning to be inventive? Have you thought about it? I guess we're all Zooming our Seders. How are you changing? Obviously we're changing the Seder in a million different ways probably, but is there anything that you are looking forward to that you think might be special as you adapt?
I think so. I think we're going to try, and each of our families has a well curated family songbook that originally was hand typed in the 1970s, at least in our case, and you can still see the mimeographed pages and where whiteout was used to correct things. So I'm going to be asking my dad to send me a scan of our song sheet, and then I'm going to be asking my husband's family to send his, and hopefully we will be singing those songs that really still have a lot of meaning to me, and connect me to the Seders of both my childhood and adulthood. And I think that music, whether it's 2 people or 25 people, is such a huge part of the Seder, whether it's in the incantation of the Seder story itself or in just these songs that are for children of all ages. So I think that we're going to have a little Passover song dance party, hopefully, and release some.
I'm so glad
at the same time.
So I'm so glad that you brought up singing.
Maybe this may come as a news to him, but that's my plan anyway.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up singing, and I'm glad that you brought up having to scan pages, because actually those are 2 things that are issue. Well, first of all, because that's something I've been thinking about. Do I FedEx my sister's family some Haggadot, or do I scan them?
There's a wonderful app called TurboScan. It's $1.99, and it just download this app. It will make your scanning of anything super easy. It will create multi-page documents for you on your phone and email them for you from your phone to people. It clarifies the pages, it straightens the pages, it does anything that you could possibly need it to do from a technical point of view, and it's fabulous. It'll help you a lot.
That's fantastic. TurboScan. All right. Now, the other issue though, and I'm noticing it as we're talking over each other a little bit, and I think this is something, Jane, that you were worried about with the singing, is when we all sing, do we only hear ourselves? Because don't we each kind of mute the other people when we talk over each other? Does anybody know?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I'm sort of grappling with. So far, when we have listened into a Kabbalat Shabbat service or something like that, you're supposed to go on mute, and then it ends up that me and my husband are singing on the couch together. And my husband is the most wonderful person in the world. You know him, Liza, but he doesn't have the greatest voice. And I would say it's
I hope he's
just,
not listening.
It's okay. He knows this.
Okay.
So but he's been saying, no, but we have to do songs. So I think what we're going to do is take everybody off mute then, and then just like whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
Adeena's absolutely right. Song is central to this, and we have all sorts of things that we have added over the years to our our Seder, and so we want to keep doing that, recognizing that it's not going to sound the way it has before, but nothing's going to be the way it was before. We're starting to create a Haggadah on Haggadot.com, which allows you to sort of create a Haggadah from very different traditions, and then I hope we'll turn it into a PDF and send it to our guests. But we're still figuring that part out. I had sort of a revelation this morning, because until now I had been thinking like, well, I came upon a beautiful prayer for hand washing. And I thought, oh, that's great. We'll add that to the section on hand washing in the Seder. And I was thinking about just bringing in some things from the current situation. And I don't know, that doesn't seem enough to me. Right now, I am thinking like we have to totally lean in to this unprecedented experience that we are having, that is mystifying, isolating, terrifying, all of the above, and really, really kind of think of every aspect of the Seder in light of where we are now. Because otherwise I feel like we're not actually getting to the heart of what we're supposed to do. We are in our Egypt now. We're going through this very narrow passage, and because Seder isn't just about oppression and flight; it's also about spring and renewal, and a journey somewhere. You're not just fleeing from; you're going to, and so I feel like every part of the Seder needs to reflect where we are now.
Definitely.
We have a couple questions from our listeners, if you guys want to switch over to the Q&A.
Sure. I wonder, I would love to, I hope there are questions about food. This has been, we've talked a lot about the ritual aspect and the more kind of philosophical questions, but if people have food questions, we can answer those too.
Yeah, I see a food question from, this one is from Madine Shahar. She says she has a very unique situation. She writes, I'm used to a large kibbutz seder with over 700 people, a choir and a special Haggadah. Food was never the main dish. Now we are just 3 people and I'm not sure what to serve. The Haggadah and the seder are no problem, but I have never held a Passover seder at home, especially for only 3. 1 vegetarian, 1 vegan, and 1 kibbutznik that eats everything. So any advice for Madine?
Well, Israeli food, I'm sure Adeena has a lot of ideas. Israeli food is so vegetable focused, and it's very easy to eat vegetarian and eat very, very well. I will say that I have had to do vegetarian meals, and I did mushroom risotto last year. But if you want to stand around stirring, which I actually did it in the Instant Pot, and it came out really well, so that it was done at the end of the service when it was time to eat. But Adeena, what do you suggest?
I might suggest not to plug my own dish, but the melted cabbage from Sababa.
Plug away.
So there's a dish in the book that uses the most prosaic of ingredients as a head of cabbage, and has kind of gone viral. I mean, it went viral when the book came out about 7 months ago. And then in the age of Corona cooking, I just think people are looking for simple, humble, inexpensive, delicious food. And this braised cabbage, which is sort of seared and then cooked slowly like meat, really hits the bill. And a lot of meat eaters find that it completely satisfies their desire for like a main course. So from Medine, I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce your name, but I think that the melted cabbage could be great. If you eat kitniot legumes, you could put tahina on top of it for some extra protein.
I've made it, by the way. It is really amazing. I've made it several times.
And then, I'm a big fan when you're making a meal that you want to have be low. First of all, when you're making a Seder for a smaller group, in a way, there's a lot less stress. Like, you're not going to be worrying about 12 people waiting for the hot food to come out. You can just pull the chicken out and cut it and carve it when you want to, or have room temperature food. Or I think in some ways it's going to cause a lot of us to reevaluate the way that we entertain and the pressure we put on ourselves on these occasions, because the priorities are different. So, I think it's not just about what you serve this year, but also how you serve it, and using this as an opportunity to really take the oppression aspect out of entertaining, which a lot of us can feel when we're hosting for a big group, and just try and ease into making things that make you happy, that are easy to prepare, and don't feel pressure. I think a lot of salads, room temperature dishes are really great, things that you can make in advance and keep in the fridge. But also, because it's a smaller group, you can take a little break and sort of prepare. Maybe I think that in some ways that sounds liberating, actually.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about how to accelerate something that I think is so important for Passover anyhow, and that is sort of rebelling against, pushing back against what I call the Passover industrial complex. It's like Jews survived for zillions of years somehow without kosher for Passover wasabi sauce, and we should be able to do so again. So over the last many years, I've kind of reduced the amount of kosher for Passover junk that I have bought. If I didn't eat potato chips during the year, I'm not going to eat them necessarily during Passover, but also to do as Adeena says, and really focus on salads, fresh vegetables, things that just kind of feel like spring, feel like the bounty of the earth.
Artichokes.
And
artichokes.
And even though I do make a good brisket. I even shared the recipe once with forward readers. We've always had vegetarians at our Seder, so for me, I make, other than the actual meat, everything was always vegetarian. So I, over the years, just developed a really good vegetable soup that tastes just as good as chicken soup, to tell you the truth. And then that way everybody could eat it. And I think this year is just going to accelerate these kinds of trends.
I have a suggestion. There's a great recipe that we did publish on the forward by Joan Nathan, the wonderful Joan Nathan. And it is in Italy, eggs are something that they eat a lot for Passover, obviously symbolizing renewal and all sorts of wonderful things. And she has a recipe for slow roasted, I think it's roasted, slow cooked, hard boiled eggs served over spinach. Now that's vegetarian, but not vegan. But it's a delicious, beautiful dish.
Wow.
And the recipe's on the forward.
I just found it. I'll post the link in the chat. Joan Nathan's long cooked hard boiled eggs with spinach.
Yep.
Sounds amazing. And by the way, for those listening, we are going to compile all of these recipes and links into a single Word doc or Google Doc, and then send it out to our registrants after this webinar is over. So stay tuned for that.
I do think another opportunity that we have, I mean, if some people are really attached to making traditional dishes, and, I think fortunately, if you want to make a brisket or a meat stew, those are things that freeze really well. So, you could make a brisket and then portion it out and pop it in the freezer and then eat it over the next few weeks, So, if you're really committed to doing that, regardless of the size of your Seder, and, not everyone is having a Seder for 2 or 3. People who are home with their children are cooking for larger groups. So, I think some of those traditional dishes still have their place. But yeah, interesting.
May I ask a question of Adeena?
Yeah.
This is Jane. So what would be a vegetarian alternative for the shank bone?
Oh, that's a good idea. A good question. I'm trying to think based upon what the shank bone represents on the Seder plate, which is, if I'm not mistaken, it's when the Passover.
Yeah, like the Paschal sacrifice.
I was thinking maybe beets because they're kind of bloody and red. I think beets would be good. Actually, I would do a roasted beet or a shredded grated beets or something. Oh, someone just wrote, my rabbi says beets.
Oh, that's great. Wow.
Perfect.
Adeena,
Well, thank you all.
hit the nail on the head.
Adeena, we actually have another question. This one comes from Lauren Griffiths. She writes, since my Seder is small this year, I don't want to make a main protein with lots of sides. I'd like to make one dish that is all encompassing. I'll still have gefilte fish and matzo ball soup, but what's a good one pot meal for the main course?
Did she say vegetarian or no?
Nope. She just said main protein with lots of sides. She doesn't want to make a main protein with lots of sides, but rather one dish that's all encompassing.
I mean, listen, there are a lot of people for whom a really hearty and rich bowl of soup can serve as a main course. So there's a soup that I just published on my website and on Instagram for harira soup. If you eat legumes, like a really rich chickpea soup that also has lentils in it and broken pasta, but you could use, you could leave that out if you wanted. And it has a lot of lemon in it and a lot of cinnamon and cumin and turmeric and different spices. And then I stir fresh spinach into it at the end. So it has it's like greens and it's really rich and savory. I think mushrooms also are just wonderful if you don't want to make like a main protein. Like I could see making some kind of like a mushroom like stew and then putting it maybe over quinoa, like a side of quinoa with like tossed a lot of herbs, sort of like a tabbouleh, but made with quinoa with like mint and parsley and cilantro. And so you have this beautiful herb salad and then maybe this mushroom ragu almost, which is what they would call it in France, but it's really like sort of a stew of sorts with different kinds of mushrooms and caramelized onions and garlic.
There's Melissa Clark's mushroom bourguignon.
Yeah,
which is amazing. It really is so good. And actually it's on my website, Life, Death and Dinner. I wrote about it recently because I made it. So I think you can click from there and get the recipe or just Google Melissa Clark's mushroom bourguignon. But I have another suggestion that I think would fit the bill, and it's from Adeena's cookbook, and I've made it, and it's stuffed tomatoes with meat, with hamburger, right?
Totally.
They are so delicious. Any kind of stuffed vegetables is a really great one pot meal.
Great idea. Great idea. Another thing that it's a little bit schmancy if don't have access to a farmer's market, but I really enjoy like getting a whole head of oyster mushrooms and just throwing it in the oven, and it roasts up like meat, and then you can like slice it and put herb sauce on it. Same for like a whole cauliflower, which at this point we all know how to make because of Alon Shaya and Eyal Shani from Miznon. Like that's also just a great main course, like sort of has that feeling of like a turkey or something that you carve, but actually it's just a really simple vegetable.
Are there other questions?
We have a lot of comments. Let's see.
One thing that I wanted to talk about is that a lot of people are going to be looking to make things that are from their pantries. People who aren't doing a lot of shopping for fresh food. who maybe just don't want to go to the store that much, but who maybe stocked up on things. And so I'd love to ask if you guys have any suggestions, but I was thinking, for example, haroset. I grew up in the Ashkenazi tradition where it was apples and nuts, but the Sephardic tradition, it's dried fruit and nuts, and that's such a good pantry, little pantry dish, because most people have some kind of, and it's so adaptable. If you have raisins, you can use raisins. If you have figs or dates or anything, and any kind of nuts. And so that was one thing I was thinking for a pantry dish. But is there anything else? Well, and we were talking about mushrooms, and if you have dried mushrooms, some people keep dried mushrooms. I have some that you can do a lot of things with that.
So first of all, I absolutely agree with you about the Sephardi haroset. For many years now, I've used Joe Nathan's recipe for Egyptian haroset, which, and I make the Ashkenazi one as well, and the Egyptian one is still the favorite. Actually, last night I made a really good stew with barley and leeks and mushrooms. And as Adeena just mentioned with the harira, then you put in spinach or kale at the end. And again, I think if you're using kitniot this year, that something like that you could also use chickpeas or quinoa in that, and it was really yummy.
I should say, I'm not sure everybody knows what kitniot is. I actually said something about kitniot to somebody who I thought was fairly religious, and they didn't know what I meant. So what that refers to is rice, legumes, beans, which were traditionally not permitted on Passover.
Yeah.
Say that again?
For Ashkenazi Jews.
For Ashkenazi Jews, exactly.
Anything basically that could be mistaken for something that could be ground into flour, essentially.
Right. And just a few years ago, the conservative rabbis said that it is permissible now. But there are people who are Ashkenazi Jews who are quite religious. Many still don't want to incorporate kitniot into their meals.
And that's why quinoa has become the darling of the non-legume eating, at least Orthodox community, because it has a grain-like consistency and presentation, even though it's actually from the beet family and it's not a grain, it's a seed. So that's why quinoa, I think I have a recipe somewhere online for like a quinoa fritter, which is not for this, which you combine it with a little bit of mashed potato and then you fry it in a skillet and it gets really crispy on the edges. So that would really nice over some wilted greens. That could be a really good main course actually. And quinoa has a lot of protein and very versatile, kind of manna-like, in that it takes on the flavor of anything that you throw its way. But I even think a potato kugel could actually be, I could be very happy having a really generous hunk of potato kugel and a salad for dinner.
Sounds amazing.
Like imagine if you were in France and you were having like a gratin potatoes with a salad, like that's a meal. So like I make my kugel very rich and crispy on the outside and like almost pudding like on the inside. So like if you don't want to make a main course, like you could make a really invest in your potato kugel, put a lot of eggs in it, nice generous amount of seasoning, salt, pepper, oil, and like cook it for a really long time, and it almost becomes like a pudding, crispy pudding dish, and then eat that with a salad. Like I'm getting ideas for my own Seder.
Sounds really good.
We have a couple more questions that have come in. So this one's from Mikal Levine, slightly off topic, but do you have a good nut-free idea for haroset? Because when you just leave out the nuts, it's kind of boring. And Susan Stone asks, eggs are difficult to get here at the moment. What could we put in salt water instead? So you can have a go at either of those.
So in my
Peas
house,
instead of
we
nuts.
served red potatoes or parsley as our thing that we dipped in salt water. Many people have different traditions based on their family. So red potatoes work nicely. That was always our treat. And as kids, like, you know, because there was such a long time until the Seder meal, I would always sneak an extra potato or two to tide me over until the dinner.
Mhm. We use
Jane,
parsley too, and people use celery.
yeah. Jane, what about you?
I agree. In fact, because our Seder service used to go for so long, I got in the habit of putting lots of vegetable snacks on the table, you know, little cherry tomatoes and carrots and cut up celery, maybe even sometimes some cut up gefilte fish to tide people over. I think the question about how to replace nuts is really interesting. You know, I don't know if something like matzah farfel would do it because it wouldn't have retained the crispness with the liquid. But maybe that at least might look a little bit like a choroset.
Toasted coconut?
Ooh.
Yeah, that's an idea.
Roasted chickpeas if you're eating kitniyot.
Yeah.
Here's another question. It's less food oriented, but it comes from Judy Marcus. She asks how to balance our desire to prepare for, cook for, and honor Passover and the Seders, as I have done traditionally for the past 70 years, with how hard it is for me to focus, complete tasks these days, with all the anxiety I'm feeling about friends who are seriously ill, trying to offer support to many friends and adult children living in New York who are so fearful of the virus. How do you do Passover without it being an added pressure at these difficult times?
Such a good question.
Wow.
Oh my gosh, that is the question of the moment, really.
Yep.
And I think one of the things is that we just really have to be kind to ourselves and adjust our expectations. I think even though I've been a working woman all my life, I still absorb the expectation that the beauty of the table, it takes me more than an hour to set my Passover table usually, and the food and the presentation is largely up to me. And I remember years ago reading Blue Greenberg's book, How to Run a Jewish Household, and she would have dreams before Passover that everything would be clean and there would be gigantic vats of matzo ball soup and gefilte fish waiting for her. And we put so much pressure on ourselves in ordinary times, and as a listener said, in this extraordinary time, even more so. So I think above all else, we should just allow ourselves to be good to ourselves, to breathe, to recognize that having a perfect Seder is actually not the real mitzvah that we're trying to accomplish here, that it's really about telling the story and finding meaning in it today.
I think that's a great answer. I think also, you know, do the Seder at the time of day that is less stressful for you. If you want to do it during the day, do it during the day. If you want to break it up in parts, break it up in parts. And, you know, the meal portion doesn't have to be the focal point of the Seder. Like if, you know, in my sister, sometimes on Friday night, they just have for Shabbat dinner, they just have chicken soup. Everyone likes it. So they take the chicken, they put the boiled chicken in the bowl with the vegetables and the broth, and that's dinner. Like do what allows you to, you know, focus on what you deem important this year, you know, and obviously like a lot of us are having financial stress. A lot of us are separated from dear family members. A lot of us are having health issues, you know, so I think that like more than any other time, like this is the time to, as Jane said, just do what feels right.
And Jane, you said to me the other day that you feel like you're just going to have to let things go, let some things go. And I think we all are. And I think that that's more than okay. Because this is a time that is extraordinary.
As
Yes.
someone who's comment about less cleaning, and that's actually been a big discussion in the Orthodox community over the last few years, because people take the cleaning to the point where they're bone tired by the time Passover comes around, and it was never intended to be so rigorous that, you know, you have to be scraping a toothpick between the grout on your tiles to remove every single piece of chametz or leavening from your home. Like, a lot of the idea of clearing the chametz from your house is also metaphorical and symbolic, and it's just as acceptable to just if you are interested in observing the laws, to just put all your stuff in a cabinet and tape it shut, and that's enough. You don't need
And by the way,
yourself crazy.
And by the way, in this particular moment, when people need to keep food in their pantries, keep extra food, keep extra provisions,
Yes.
of course, it doesn't necessarily, I mean, I don't want to speak for everyone, but it doesn't seem to make sense to actually get rid of food that you're going to need again in a few weeks. So putting it away should be absolutely enough.
I mean, I think that what we should all do this year is put our health first and our safety first, and everything else comes secondary to that. Like, we have to be thinking that way, you know?
Health and safety and mental health.
Mental health.
Yeah.
is
Well, it's also interesting because I think that there is this part of the Seder and part of Passover that asks us to examine, you know, what is enough, you know, dayenu. And we recognize that there are so many things that are sufficient for us. And one of the things I am thinking about a lot this year is, you know, what's the excess in my life that I've been holding on to that I can let go, at least for these 2 nights, for this week, and identify the things that are important, even when they are out of our control, like our health, and sort out how we can find the nourishment in our tradition to just to figure out, okay, yeah, in fact, we do have enough.
Thank you so much, Jane, Liza, Adeena. I think that's a good place to close this out. This was such a moving discussion, and I sure learned a lot, and I'm going to take away a lot from this and incorporate it into my own Seder, and I'm sure that our viewers will as well. Thank you again, and just for those that maybe tuned in a little late, there were a lot of really great recommendations for recipes, for you know, various links, and even I think Jane mentioned a book that might be inspiring to read at this moment. So we will follow up with all of the registrants, anyone that registered for this webinar. We have your email. We're going to send out all those links to recipes and everything else. So look out for that, and follow Adeena, Liza, and Jane. They have social media and amazing podcasts and writing out there. So we will send all those links out shortly. And do you guys have any closing thoughts?
Well, I thank you for this conversation, because I have found it inspiring too. And I just wish everyone Chag Sameach and a sweet and meaningful Passover.
This has been a great pleasure. It's been wonderful to talk with all of you. And I also wish you a very, very happy, safe, healthy holiday.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. And this video will be available on our Facebook, on the Museum of Jewish Heritage Facebook page after the fact. So you can go check it out as soon as we close out of this webinar. All right. Chag Sameach to everybody.
Bye.
Stay safe. Be well. Take care.